I'm going to start recording here. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Habitat Now. I'm your host, Aaron Shea, and we are at the halfway point through the Not Grandma's Glass presentation that started January 1st and will continue forever. Forever. So if you haven't seen or been part of this exhibition yet, it's on at notgrandmasglass.com, and it's featuring artwork by artists that are not in Grandma's collection yet. But this is not entirely true. I have seen many of these pieces in people's collections that I know very, very well. So it's great to see that they're already successful and amazing. But I really feel like they're pushing the medium, and it's important to bring attention to them, which is the point of the show. This month, June, we have Chad Fonfara joining us from his home, and he will be giving us a discussion about his work, his life, his career. And we're honored to have him. And so I'm going to go ahead and take over your screen real quick and make sure that I can get my PowerPoint to work. So let me close that in the screen, get this one going. And then I will get through some of the homework here, as we say. All right. So share, and this is going to happen right here. All right, share. I'm on the wrong screen though. It's all right. All right, so welcome, Chad. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I do want to make a note that Glass 49 is still online. I'd love for you guys to go and check out the site. We've asked a lot of our artists to get the word out there this month via social media and Instagram and TikTok and everything else. So the show's been doing very, very well. We want to make sure that everybody has a chance to go see the show. 50th, this is our new event we're doing September. Excuse me, September 9th, 10th, and 11th. It's going to be amazing and a real great opportunity to get together for an in-person event, sharing what we know and love with many of the artists from around the world. And it's going to be the 9th, 10th, and 11th. We're going to change it up a bit and not have a public opening that particular month during the VIP weekend, and have some more special events, including a visit to Toledo, hopefully a very important Habatat 50th anniversary dinner starring a lot of the artists, and Ferdinand Hampson will giving a talk about his life in glass, which I'm looking forward to. Expect some more information about that soon. If you're looking to consign work, the vault is going to be opening at that same time to the public for a bigger opening. And it's an amazing back room offering work on the secondary market, and it's an important place to come see. These Habitat Zooms will continue. We have some amazing plans coming up soon, visiting artists from around the world, and I look forward to you joining me. Steve Lynn will be having an exhibition at the same time as our Habitat 50th anniversary at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. So we'll be peering into them through the magical world of Zoom and getting an idea of what their show looks like. It should be a lot of fun. I know Steve's here today. Thanks, Steve. So Not Grandma's Glass. This is on notgrandmasglass.com. And we're halfway through the artwork on display by the artists of Morgan Peterson, Matt S. Cookie, Michael Janis and Tony Porto, John Moran, John Bowley, and Chad Fonfara are all up on display now. And the exhibition page basically gives you a link to their own experience, and you can watch their Zooms from the past there. So we're getting the word out for that. This is the theme, and it's also the future of the medium. So Chad is online on Not Grandma's Glass, and he's here today. So I will stop sharing my robot here and let Chad say hello and take over. Chad, join us.
Thanks. Thank you, Aaron. Hello to everybody. I'm really excited to be here and appreciate y'all taking the time. Nice to see familiar faces chime in right away. People I haven't seen in a couple of years. So this is brightening my living space. I think I should add, I wanted to say my experience with Habitat, I'm sure like most people's, has been a memorable and tremendous one. Aaron and Corey and the crew at Habitat invited me up to the 43rd Invitational, I believe. And, at that time I had been working in glass and teaching glass for about 8 years. And I find myself serendipitously in this gallery, this premier gallery with the best of the best, and I've never been in a room with so much work, and the cherry on top of that was I got to meet living artists. I got to meet, see their work, of people that I lectured about to my students. So I'll never forget that.
It's great. Yep, glad to have you, my friend.
Should I start the slideshow?
Yeah, let's get going on it. Yep,
okay.
And start talking about.
All right.
your work?
So I just wanted to start out with a composite photo of the work that I was invited to be, that I'm making to be, I was invited to be part of this exhibition, my Condemnation series. It's current. I started it back in about 2014. It's been a slow progress, but the meaning of the work to me is growing. The work keeps evolving, and so.
Chad, are you sharing? Are you sharing your screen yet?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Making sure you got the screen share going so you can see what you're looking at.
Sure. I'm sorry about that.
Hit the green button.
Got it.
Select your screen. And voila.
Got that? Okay.
We're good.
All right. So there's that composite photo. And I wanted to, I'm starting off with that because that's the meat of this presentation to get to. But I think it relates, and it's important for me, especially because I don't know a lot of people who I'm talking to. Just to give you a context of my experience in glass, some of the forms that preceded these, to give you a timeline of how I arrived at these working process. So I'm going to start in 1978 in Chicago, and me at 4 years old. And my mom sent me this photo a couple years ago. You know, this is the material photo, the thing that gets, you know, there's one of, gets buried in an album and you don't see it for years. And so she hadn't seen this, I hadn't seen it, but to me, I found it applicable just because I remember this trip vividly. And you know, I love to have this snapshot of me with the monumental Calder in the background, knowing that later in life I would get into sculpture. But what was funny to me now looking back is like all the birds littered in the foreground. So there's a kind of mishmash of everything that would come to be in this.
How old were you there? About 4, you said, or something like
that?
Yeah,
I think it was about 4 or 5 years old. Yeah. And it was, I don't think it was winter time in Chicago. It must have been close to winter. It was cold. So skip ahead 30 years. I got the opportunity to teach sculpture at a university starting in 2006. For 2 years, it was on an annual basis before I applied for a tenure track in 2008. And as I said, the position was hired on my expertise in sculpture. They just so happened to have a kind of a derelict glass studio that they used, not just for the students to dip their toes in, and it was an open enrollment. So it was a reach out to the other departments at the university. So during my summers, I got to fire the furnace up and play with this new, to me, medium and see what I could do with it. So I spent a couple years, you know, doing foundational work, really bad vessels, really clunky work, but it bit, you know, that material bit like it does for a lot of people. And so I pushed myself in it. I kind of put sculpture on hold because this took a lot of time and I was enamored by it. So in a couple of years, I got to the point where I'm pushing the vessel work and experimenting with glass color, because that was all new to me, and powdered color had reactions that were just incredible. And so it was only through the process of working and getting in the heat and colors mixing that you could arrive at these things. So it took me back to a bit of work I've done in ceramics with ceramic glazes and stuff like that. But the compulsion to make sculpture was always there. And after that vessel work waned and that control, I started to move that vessel work slowly into a form that was a form unto itself, no function, nothing to call it outright. So that's the middle picture. And the colors on this are a lot like the vessel work. They're taken directly from that. The piece is encased. And then from there, I moved into what became my Cases and Remains series, where the biggest difference, putting color on the outside, getting those, it gives you a matte look to it. It kind of dematerializes the glass, takes away that gloss. You don't recognize it as glass right away. Man, I love that. I was just drawn to that. You could pile up powder and color like on the stem part of the top piece and just do a little bit of heat to melt in and get a different texture. It was at this time, social media wasn't a big thing. This is about 2009. And I remember finding Martin Yanecki's work on YouTube. And that blew me away. I'd never seen anything like that. And watching him work on those videos, I knew it was going to be worth my time to further, working glass and see where I could arrive at. So I remember seeing some of his tools that were called inside out tools. I had no idea what that was. I watched him use them. And it's so on this picture on the right that I started to work on that form, that glass form, both on the inside and the outside. Drizzling on glass for texture, blowing the glass super thin to where it almost collapsed, and then letting it collapse and then blowing it a little bit back out and cooling it to get an almost a thin papery look to it. The other thing I liked is it didn't sit on a table. I could make work that I could do something else with. It wasn't relegated to the table surface. So here's just some examples of the fun stuff I was arriving at with color. Anybody that uses powdered colors on glass, this is it's that mixing of color to give you a different look to it. So on some of this they're fantastical or surreal. On others, I'm looking at my source material and trying to emulate that and move towards copying a pod or a seed of the texture of the color in there. So a lot of this is just powdered, sifted on the surface, having fun with adding textures, wraps, and drizzles on there. And then working, as I said, or like instead of fighting the heat, working with the heat, or pushing that piece out of control and then reining it back in. With anybody that does glass, there's a ton of failure in all this stuff. So it was fun to push the envelope up until the point of failure, so you could get to the point where you could recognize what was happening, pull it back a little bit, let the piece cool, and then freeze it, anneal it, lock that form in. Having worked in like wood, plaster, clay, wax, all those materials, I did a little bit of resin work doing wood pieces and sculpture, but never had I had a material that had translucency like glass did. And so that was a big thing that the medium offered me, that I hadn't experienced with another material. So always fascinating in glass is how it looks different in different lights. And so this is a few pictures from, I refined this work enough to figure out how I wanted to display it, how to make them their own pieces. Makes it easier to sell that stuff. So that's another reason to do it. And up in the right-hand corner, just a picture of like source material. These are inspired by chrysalis forms, pod seeds, as I mentioned. For me, this body work they were remnants of a metamorphosis. They were meant to create a bit of a mystery. They were shells of former inhabitants. They were a space where incubation took place. And my experience and the experience of the public was, there was something recognizable but yet unearthly in these forms. So it was enough to hold your interest, make you curious about it. Originally, like entomological, botanical were my inspirations. The piece on the left here, and after this, I'll talk about this installation I did down in Salina, Kansas. But that piece was displayed, and I had a woman come up to me and tell me that reminded her of a buffalo stomach. I had to take her word at that, but once she told me that, one, I loved that people brought to it what they knew or what they saw in it. Love that about making art. So I added anatomical to my description of these pieces. So you have these pieces that, the origin functions, the connotations, they're just bounded by the imagination of the viewer. The context is not heavy. It's just that, and that was enough for this work. And that was enough to start creating some interest in the work that I was doing for displaying these in public and galleries. Okay, so I get obsessive. I obsessively work in material. I kind of know no bounds in that. So I was making a lot of these, and mostly I could work in the summers was the only time I could get to these pieces teaching. So that's that day after classes dismissed, I never volunteered to teach summer school, summer classes. I got everybody out, got everything clean, locked the doors, and went to town. And so I started accumulating a lot of these forms over a couple of years, and I got to figure out what to do with them. So let's have a show, right? And I was invited to do to show in the Skylight Gallery at the Museum of Nebraska Art in the town of the university that I was working at, and it's the whole top floor lit beautifully by daylight, and they had this unencumbered 60-foot wall, which that's what attracted me. I knew I wanted to create an installation, you know, mostly for that wall, with supplemented by a few tabletop pieces. And so I put together about 50 forms. I created new armatures for them, steel armatures, to get them on the wall, to get them up, and to get them out, push them out, create this environment for them. So here's some detailed shots of the installation, and a picture of me and my artist talk, just to give you a sense of scale on those. But it was a learning experience for me as much as, you know, it was hopefully interesting to the public, because I have no way to do this in the studio or at my residence. So it's these chances that allow me to really play with that work and that scale. And for that, it was such a good experience. It led me to ideas for new installations.
Hey Chad, how do those hang on the wall on the stands themselves? Are they connected directly to the glass, or is there something else that I can't tell what that strap is?
This is side. So if you look on the upper left, that's an artificial sinew. Okay. That I for several reasons, after going through a lot of different materials, I love that, settled on that, because it has a translucency to it. It's very waxy. You know, you can, as you wrap it, it constricts, you can push on it and make it malleable. So you can almost distress it enough that you can't see the individual lines going around it. And it's incredibly, what do I want to say? It's strong material. It doesn't take much to hold a lot of weight. And so you can kind of dispel how heavy these pieces are, make them appear much lighter than they actually are. And it was, and I think I get better at this point of refining this point to make that hook smaller and do less of a wrap.
Gotcha. So it hooks to the glass and you wrap it up tight.
Yeah,
gotcha.
And yeah, they come off, you know, slide off and slide on, just a little bit of a loop on them.
Got it. Good to know.
So the next venture with this work was I applied for an artist in action at the Salina River Arts Festival. Not a festival guy, not an arts festival guy by any means. I had a very good artist friend that told me, I know that you're going to think this is crazy, but you've got to apply for this because it's such a fun time and there's such good people, you know, and that's a good enough reason to do anything is to meet new good people on the reference of a good friend. So I applied for this installation. I went down there, visited the site, locked something in, and you know, put a flag in it, came back, drew up my proposal, and it came with a stipend, which was nice, glass being so expensive. Don't make any money off of it, but it would pay for the creation of it. And that was very necessary for me to be able to do something like this. So I did cull some of the pieces from that museum installation, just because I had such a limited time to do this. And then in addition to those, I changed, honestly, there's no wall down there. So I did some steel armatures so they could be positioned on the bank and accessible to the public. And then I went in and created these float forms, which I'll talk more about. And then in the background, these cattail forms, just to make a variety and expand, take up a little bit more of the river and the bank. So I did these float pieces, which are obviously sourced from the pod pieces. The key here was to make an armature that would sink down in the riverbed and hold that piece. You know, these are about 8-10 pounds, just on the surface of the water. So they look like they broke off, a plant or a tree upstream, and this is on their journey downstream. One thing I should say that was funny is when I got down there and I talked to the director and I picked this spot, she goes, we've been doing this about 60 years and nobody goes in the water. And I said, yeah, but that's where I want my piece. Why does nobody go in the water? Expecting her to say something about sewage or pollutants. And she's like, no, there's a whole mess of snapping turtles and snakes in that river. And I said, well, that doesn't bother me. I'll take my chances. I never ran into any snakes or snapping turtles, but it was loaded with these huge bullfrogs that, the first year I was down there in my bare feet walking through the mud, and so you chase them up out of their mud holes, and they were serenading us all morning long. Right, so now I have these strange unearthly forms. They're in a new context. They're out in the public. They're out in nature. And then you turn the public loose, and that is that, there was tons of kids down there, and it was just fun to sit back and watch them explore these pieces. It really wasn't important what they were saying. It was fun. I sat back at such a distance to watch them touch and move, push on a piece, reach into a piece, look into a piece. So that was, I got more of an experience putting them out there than I did the previous in the museum. So my friend Randy was right. I had a great time. Mary and I had a great time down there. So 2 years later, I applied for it again. And knowing again, if I got the stipend, it'd be a way to approach it differently, come up with a new idea, and arrive at a new form. So this is where I decided to try to make a larger scale piece using component glass parts. So my assistant Kenny and I spent a couple months in the studio making these individual parts, which compiled from a steel armature into these lily pieces. These are about 6 feet in diameter. I think they're somewhere like 32 pieces to each one. Probably the weight of each one is upwards of 100 pounds easy. And then just for visual impact, I had to come up with something, for the lily pads. So I went back to my sculptural background and being able to recall materials and what to use and that fit the bill, right? And I bought these AstroTurf, cut them out. That didn't quite work. I did a test up in a lake. That didn't work, so I had to back them with cork. And I ended up putting cork in different spots. So when they did get in the water and they did saturate, the water would start to flow over the pad, much like what I saw out in real life in nature. So the title of this piece is GMO Lily and the Gossamer Punks. And so I revisited the cattail forms, but had a little bit more fun with those and gave them mohawks and piercings and some attitude. I think the idea in my head was to set it up like a band out on the water. So on the right here is armatures that I built to lift and hold those 100-pound lilies right at the surface of the water. And I had to make them adjustable in height because they said if it rained at any time during the festival that your water level is going to change dramatically. So I had to make it so they can move up and down about a foot. And here is part of the installation, just getting started with the armatures and the lily pads. That's my assistant, Kenny. To this day, we both ended up back in Omaha here, and he assists me and I assist him. We've been doing that for the last about 3 years on a regular basis. And then the final result was here, and then again, that's the three days of just sitting back and watching how people interact with it. So at the time that I'm working with these, hang on here, I got some notes. At the time I'm making these, I'm also, I have been affected by the event that I'm going to show you in a few slides of why I started making these condemnation work. So I've been affected. These forms that I saw were interesting, but I had no idea how to approach them. And I put this slide in here just to show, anybody that works, and this is true of just about any material. It takes work to make work. It takes work to get someplace. You gotta be working in it, and there's no formula for these. And as with most people, you gotta work through the good and the bad, and remember what works, discard what doesn't. So the top is my attempt at these birds. I think in about 2012, I worked on those for a stint. That was as close as I could get. And it wasn't in my mind's eye where I wanted, but I was getting someplace that wasn't a cases and remains piece, that wasn't a vessel, that was moving towards that direction of a bird form. And then the bottom part of that is the next year of getting some different tools, product of more practice with that. I don't not like these pictures of the ones on the bottom. I still have them, but they weren't, like I said, at the time, they weren't my end goal with these. All right, so all that builds up to the condemnations works, and it's, it's not meant to be shocking. I don't think it's shocking. It's, but it's a definite departure from the happy glass that I've been doing. And so this is my source material. This is the event that made such an impact. And these are taken from a news story and images in BB, Arkansas. Is that mass death. I know everybody heard about it. Aaron asked me the other day, have we been hearing about these anymore? And I can't recall if we did, but I know there's been other things in the news that has kind of taken precedent. So, but this did happen, and I remember there was several instances of that happening at the time. But so you have thousands of birds that died in almost instantaneous traumatic brute force death, and because we had these photographs of it. That's what fascinated me is, the broken bodies. It's material. It's a form. It's a material. The larger themes are obvious: mortality, fragility, finality. What struck me about it was, we're in this day and age where we are inundated with tragedy. And I speak more so to like human tragedy and events. And I remember Columbine, when that would happen, where I was, and that seemed to be the first thing like it. And now, we have statistics to compile, like how many there's been this year even. And that's unreal when you hear it, because it doesn't get reported. It just becomes more common. And so for me on these, it was, I'm seeing a form that's a routine form, easily forgotten, an everyday form that I see, but it's been transformed and individualized in its grounding by this traumatic event. And to me, it spoke to our shared existence, our shared actuality amongst each other, amongst other living things, that shared materiality. These works are, from my point of view, they're intended to be more anthropological more than they are ornithological. And I think as I go further on, that might make more sense. But with that in mind, and that's what holds my interest in these works, is, those themes become more expansive when creating this body of work and how viewers see it, when you see these more as relating to us and our human condition, more so than just a freak event or another species divorced from us. So other themes that run through this work are continual and mounting environmental events. I think that fits in. It's apt because we do harm to each other, but we do harm to the environment, and there are physical results. There are living things are affected, and we have to deal with that. Somebody has to clean it up. Somebody has to document that. Somebody has to record that. And that system of order that we have set up in times of chaos and tragedy, I call it like Triage Protocol. Down in the right, that's more scientific, but there's an order that we like to put things in for documenting. And then in cases like this and in human tragedy, thank goodness we have that, and most of us don't have to do this, but somebody has to go arrive at that scene first, and they have to run through how to make sense of it and what to do, you know, the protocols on what to do. And it's that arrangement and that system that informs my arrangement of the pieces. You know, they're not just random. They're not supposed to look like they just fell from the sky. There's human intervention in my pieces in the way that they're arranged. And some of my pieces, the pieces that don't have a stringent arrangement, the narrative in them is that something is acting on them, you know, and that's us in some way.
Chad, I had a question from the audience, and you might not know the answer, but do they have an explanation of what happened to the birds during the mass death like that, extinction of the animals?
They pretty much settled on, it was on New Year's Eve, and they were all in the air at the time that some fireworks went off, you know, a load of fireworks. And that sound, it didn't just startle them, it paralyzed them. Like, it knocked them unconscious and into each other. If they weren't knocked unconscious in the air, they knocked into each other because of the trajectory of their flight, and then they just fell to the ground.
There's like I've also heard of like a nature explosion happened to Cassandra Blackmore's home, where she was, you know, there was some kind of big nature boom, and I don't know what it's called, and it broke all her windows out in her home, and it affected everything around her. I think she was in California, and I'd love to remember what it was called, but you know, it just goes to show these things out of our control that, you know, affect us every day.
Mm-hmm. I remember one of the things they said is, you know, this probably has happened before. It's just populations are growing and we are encroaching on the wild, and we're seeing this more, right? We're seeing more wild inhabitants in suburban areas. We're overcrowding everybody.
Yep.
You know, so this is why I say is my 3.0 bird, where at this point in 2010, I got the chance to go to Pilchuck, and one night Karen Willingbrink and Jason Johnson showed up, wasn't on the schedule. I heard this happens a lot out there. They live in proximity to Pilchuck. And so you come down in the studio and there's Karen and Jason working on, I think it was an owl, one of her owl pieces. So I don't know her, I don't know him, you know, I don't know them, I don't know their work. And so I'm watching this for the first time, and they're using tools I've never seen, hot torches and X-Acto torches and new sculptural tools. And that was worth the price of admission to Pilchuck right there, just being able to sit behind them and watch and know that this was going to be applicable as soon as I returned home. So it was after that things started to make sense with how I wanted these birds to look, and I was able to capture that. The biggest thing that was missing was, you know, the feet, and how expressive the feet were in these photos, but how expressive they could be in this work for me. And there was no way I could do that in soft glass. And so I had to find a solution, and that was using my foundry skills, ordering some bird feet from England that had to go to customs because I wanted crow feet, and that's illegal in the United States. And I got some carry-on feet from England. Finally, took weeks to send, made molds of them, cut the toes off so I could do a two-piece mold. And that's still the mold that I use I have two sets of those for these birds, and casting them in wax and burning them out in the foundry. And I just show this one here. These are treeing them up for doing a cast, but even disembodied, they hold and are individual, and show as much expression as the bird forms do. So marrying the two really brought the work up to a new level, a level that I was excited about. So this is the first piece after all that came into play, and I got the feet, and then the feet to be attached, or feet cast and be attached. And you know, at this point, the birds, they're uniquely individual, which was important to me. They're descriptive. I'm capturing in glass a softness, a weight to these birds. I'm putting them together in a way that shows give on the body or malleability. I guess what I'm doing is dematerializing the glass, being, you know, crystal and original, crystallized and or crystalline, excuse me, and rigid, and it did fascinate me that I could make these look soft. I could make these look like they were warm, and that they were not glass forward. It was I think it was the decision my wife pointed out. I did different color beaks, and she said everything was kind of just distracting. Why not do the beaks clear? So I do utilize transparency in these pieces. It's subtle, but to me, it adds to a bit of it makes these pieces not so literal. It pushes that transparency out, makes them a little bit otherworldly. So with that piece, now I'm off and running. Everything's working. The practice has paid off. I can start to do different arrangements and create pieces that speak to my narrative, what I have in my head. So one on the left is Pillory. One on the right is what I labeled Empty Prophets 2. Just going back to the sensationalized news stories that were like, it's superstition, it's divine intervention, it's apocalyptic. You know, they don't care about what the truth is. And I guess initially when the story's fresh, they want to throw out speculation to grab headlines, and so that's kind of where the piece on the right came from, title wise. So a big source of inspiration for these are the Dutch Vanitas paintings. And I didn't find these initially. I mean, I knew about them from art history, but it wasn't until later that I started culling images from this work, and largely because we share this, you know, same subject, not just the same subject matter, but thematic similarities, transient nature of life, our earthly existence, sadness paired with beauty, that all fit into an underlying theme with my work. For those of you that were at 43, and Tim and Michael and others that were there, Steve, I had a piece up there called Raft, and it was 12 Blackburn forms, and the composition was derived largely from Jared Colt's Raft of the Medusa. I was enamored with the expressive, charged composition, straining of necks, limp heads, the visual tangle of arms and legs, the confusion, but also the thematic undertones of this. The awareness of self-mortality fits right in. The isolation that we all experience in pain and suffering, and then just the innate fight for survival in all living things. So using that composition, in summer of 2014, I was at the top of my game and time that I could vote toward it, and I just started making birds. And I may have it in my talk that this gets brought up later, but I'm thinking of it now. There's my work is in two parts when I enter the process of my work. There's the hot work on the bench, and I'll speak more to that later. But the second part of the process is when the pieces are done. That's the first time you can touch. Anybody that works in glass knows when you're working on the glass is too hot to touch. You're acting on it with tools. You're never physically, you know, the closest you get is a paper pad where you can feel the give of the glass in certain moves. But it isn't until they're cooled that I can touch them, move them around. And then it's the fun of how they're going to fit up next to each other, you know, because I don't see this in my mind's eye when I'm making the pieces. I'm working on them. I'm trying to make them the best individual bird, the most interesting, the most varied from the next as possible. And then, you know, at the end, I have this and I get to play. And that's something that goes back to my, you know, sculptural sensibilities of being able to look as much as you work, being able to look as make a change, step back, work, observe, being able to step away, arranging it one day walking away, coming back the next day, trying something else, or seeing where it can be improved. That's a part of the process that does not happen on the bench. You know, all those pieces are 2 to 3 hours, and man, it's one step to the next, and it's a pretty linear process. So in playing with those in the studio, on the left is the final raft piece, and that's as it was shown in Habatat. And then on the right is just a detailed picture of the bird grouping on the pedestal. That was the first piece where I put pieces on the wall. I mean, part of this piece was the falling aspect. And so I wanted this to look like birds are dropping and compiling on the pedestal piece. So that's the only piece I did with that. And all the work that I had done since, these are all meant to lay, or they were all meant to lay on a surface. They were affected by gravity. They were held in place by gravity. And so they were pedestal pieces. But a revelation that happened here, and that came from my wife, Mary, and she said, she's seeing how these are being laid out and how these pieces butt up against each other, and understands that kind of the simplicity of laying them on the table, of how to get that arrangement to work. And she said, what would it do? Or she kind of knew that it would create something different to put these on the wall. And that was 1.5 years to figure out that process. And I'll speak to Tim Tate, throwing me a lifeline in that. At the time it was for another reason, but man, it really changed my world. So at the Habatat show, my original way to get them on the wall were these, steel armatures. You can see remnants of the armature like coming around the bottom of the bird head. There was no way to disguise it without making them really precarious. They were clunky. They took forever to make because of the contour, the asymmetrical contour of the bird. And you're welding, you're heating metal to bend it, but then you got to cool it so you can touch the glass. If it's too hot, you're going to shatter the glass, and there's all those fun things to overcome. And this is the slide where I kind of skipped ahead talking about it. I've had these individual pieces, and now I got to figure out how they fit together. And that it still is, one of the best parts is to have all these cold, rigid birds and start to see how they're going to slide together. Then what has become the biggest technical hurdle to overcome is how to get this look of them sitting on a table affected by gravity onto the wall. And see, I'm skipping around, so that kind of changes this. I'm going to just speak briefly on this. Another part of my process is taking photographs of my work before I've arranged them, or as I'm arranging them. And it's important to me. It helps me to reduce these down to 2-dimensional and to be able to see what's going on with these forms. Sometimes it'll push the form. Sometimes it'll give me ideas for other forms. And so I started messing around on Photoshop, and then that became its own product of doing prints with them and another way to play with these pieces outside of the studio. So back to this 1.5 year long effort to figure out how to hang these on the wall. This is the gist of it, is creating a cleat and using different materials. That center picture, that left part, that looks almost like tooth enamel, that's a resin. And that's a resin that Tim Tate sent to me out of the blue, because he's like, hey man, I want to see you be doing your work. I know you're having some downtime in your studio, but here's some resin and get to work. We want to see more work. So make them in another material, cast them in this resin. What I ended up doing with it is that was the material that I needed, because I wouldn't have thought of it, to be on my shelf when I got to a point. And I'm like, so how do I figure out how to marry these up to each bird individually and fit that contour wherever I place that cleat on the piece? And so now part of the process is to, you know, do a clay component on that bird and then cast that in resin. And then I use, it's like a table saw or router track. It's a T track. And I cut those in pieces and I machine them out to make this cleat to hang on the wall. The picture on the right, that's my first experiment with it. I largely did that because that's when I started using that Hextol adhesive. And I just couldn't really believe it until I saw it. So I glued it up. I did the 7-day cure, a long cure time, and then stacked 8 pounds on that bird and let it sit for weeks. Walked away and it never moved. And that's the confidence you need to start knowing that you can use this and put this work out in the public and have it be sellable. So that made me a believer. And like I said, I don't know if I would have arrived at it so cleanly without certain things happening. Mary saying something, pushing me towards it, Tim sending that resin. So that ends the process part of it. And you know, I wanted to talk about I thought it important to talk about the cleat because it's changed my work. Now you don't see these any different on a screen like this, but everything that you've been watching before, these were all to be laid on the table. And so that's how they'd be seen in the gallery. If you purchased it, that's how you'd have to live with it at your home or wherever it was displayed. But it's these pieces I consider, I'm not afraid to consider them high relief sculpture. You know, there's one vantage point, or there is one main vantage point to these pieces. And I think they don't lose anything for them to be that way. And so now as you're seeing these pieces, these how I'm making all the pieces that are wall pieces to hang. That cleat is hidden. So the focus is on the space between the birds, the body contours, how those pieces relate to each other. And it brings all the attention back to where it needs to be. And that's, you know, that's the form itself. That's the posture of the form. That's how these pieces relate. And in that relationship, as I've mentioned earlier, you know, it's to see that relationship, to see ourselves in these light forms. So that was 2018. That's when I finally, I think I finally started to arrive with these pieces. 2018 is 2018. This piece was shown in a biennial and it sold, and the gallery told me that that if I wanted to open bidding up on that piece, that probably could go for more or whatever. I thought, well, that's not possible. The piece has already been sold, and I happen to know who bought them. They're good friends and collectors in Lincoln here. But I said they could commission me to do more. Like, you know, I am working artist. I can't do that. So right after that show, right after the opening of that, I was commissioned to do this piece. And now I get into just to show you a bit of the variety and the pieces that are available through Habatat galleries. Incidentals, once we go off screen sharing, I have a couple examples. I have an example of my cases and remains piece and an example of my bird. And on my website, which Aaron has a link to, is all the pertinent information, dimensions and year made. The set on all sides. That was this past year. This was COVID that piece was made. This was COVID, that piece was made. I don't have any need in title or in statement to have anybody know what these pieces are about. I want them more open-ended than that. But I have used the direction these pieces are taking to allow myself to get back to drawing to specific events. This one is in response to that Rittenhouse POS and the violence that he inflicted and pulled. And again, I don't want to start being the guy that is that that's too much heaviness and all that, but it is in my mind as I'm making these pieces and as I respond to current events in this world. This is a piece work in progress right now, and now for the weather. And at the time I started this piece, I don't know where it's going to end up. I start making these. I think I got 2 birds into that, you know, and the FedEx shooting happened. And so I don't want to enter myself into that conversation. I don't want to, you know, I'm wary that, like, okay, so you're showing the victims of this. Well, I'm not. This is why I work with birds, you know. This is why they're more approachable in this way than doing bodies. That doesn't work. My message is gonna turn people off, or the theme's gonna turn people off big time. But it's an instant like that it was in current events, and then I knew, like, well, I'm going to push this grouping to 8. So it's become one of my biggest groupings, and with that, with the contours of the bodies, now I'm arriving at a new arrangement for these.
Chad, are these birds like, would you say, you know, real size?
Yeah, these are real size. These are probably from beak to tail 8 to 9 inches.
Okay, very beautiful stuff.
So where I'm at now is, when I was teaching, I had control over the bronze part, and I cast those up, no problem. Once I left my teaching position, I had to search foundries, and it's been, I did find one for a while after a few failures, and they were casting my feet fine, and then they got a new crew in there, and it's just not happening. It's not working out. And I understand they're very delicate forms. I'm giving into a foundry, you know, they're not versed in doing jewelry. They're doing, you know, 80-pound casts. And so it takes a light touch, you really almost different equipment in order to get these casts to turn out. So unfortunately, I'm back to a spot right now of sending my waxes back out into the world and hoping that somebody is able to get them. My last resort is, I think I can put together a little foundry here. I just need to find the space and the way to do it, so I can have total control over these pieces again.
You also mentioned to me that the bronze wasn't super important. Would you consider changing the medium that you do the feet with?
Right, they are, and I thought about that. Casting and resin, you know, it isn't important. I mean, there's resin and there's bronze additive you can cast, you can mix in with it and get that result. But without going to it too much, it's a complicated process. You know, these are one-offs, and so I would have to. The biggest thing is that they're a complicated shape. You know, you have a lot of space in between the fingers, and so they're not something that can be a 2-part mold. If I was to cast in resin, I would have to do a cast like in latex first or silicone, but then find a way to get that foot out without destroying the silicone so much, so that I could then cast resin in that. And I've just made it really hard for myself. But no, I'm not against. And if anybody has ideas or
can I just say something?
Sure.
How about trying centrifugal casting for jewelry?
Yeah,
you could actually almost set that up yourself in your own studio. It's a small centrifugal caster. I've been casting bronze for 45 years. So for small, delicate objects like that, it really works easily and well. You can melt small amounts of metals with a blowtorch and centrifugally cast it into the molds.
Okay. That was my next question. Yeah, we can talk about that more, but just it's interesting to know.
I mean, if you want to email me back and forth, we can do that. You know,
I would love that. Thank you, Steve.
What a resource we have here. Thank you, Steve.
That's what I knew it would be. So anyway, thank you for letting me talk about that. Just putting that out there. So yeah, that's the gist of it. Thanks for stopping by the studio. Nice to have you all listen.
Can I say something, Chad?
Maybe.
Well, my access to your work didn't necessarily come from the mass death of the birds in your area. They came from that amazing history of, as vanitas, as you point out, in those 15th, 16th, to 17th century paintings, hyper-real paintings of game. And it came from the Peter Greenaway film, The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and His Lover, where they recreate all those still lifes and paintings and game in the movie. And so when I first saw your work, it looked just like it had come straight out of that kind of history. So that's why I loved them from the first time I saw them. I connected with them on a different way. Not exactly the way you meant it, but they connected with me on that manner.
Yeah, I love hearing that. And that's why, to me, like, I don't create art to have an answer. I don't create art to have a reason to talk. I create these forms. This is what we do, you know. And I understand we do need to talk about them, but it's important to me that I'm not heavy-handed, and that any work that I'm gonna investigate and spend time on, it's got to be a little bit more open-ended. And it's also a way for me to grow as an artist in the work, or arrive at different ideas and further ideas. So I'm always happy to hear how somebody else has approached it, and there are no right answers. I think that's the biggest compliment that can be paid, is hearing what somebody else got out of the work, right?
It's true. Chad, I got a question for you. Why have you tied the tails on the white birds? Are you going to hang labels on the tails, or what are your thoughts about that?
You know, when just born out of necessity, when I brought those pieces up to you at Habatat, that was the first time I'd ever created that work up and took it someplace. And having worked in a museum, like, I want to be good to those guys and gals that are working behind the scenes. And so I put toe tags on them. You know, I numbered the foam, and I put toe tags on the birds so they know where they were going to go back to, and then where they went in the arrangement. They could see that on the template. And but when I did that, I was like, I ended up making them look just like toe tags. And so I was like, I'm going to revisit that in my work. But that I think toe tags are going to make their way into that work. And when I made those, let me go back here. Am I still sharing my screen?
You're not. You're welcome to reshare, though.
Sorry, here.
Nope, I kicked you out. They're talking to you.
Okay, there's my screen share, and share it.
You can see it.
Is that coming?
Yep.
Okay. And it's the same sinew that I pulled from my cases and remains, and the pillory piece, the 3 birds hanging from the post that wound up at Habatat. That's an element that I wanted to revisit. And so I had that in my mind's eye when I made these pieces, because I'm making, as you can see on the right, in the hot glass, I'm making a place for those to look like it's being constricted. But that's one of those, and the greater themes is like the systems of control are, you know, that I think, how do I want to say it? Part of the underlying themes is the control we try to exert over other people, whether that's physical control or controlling what they believe, or I mean, drastically is trying to wipe out a group of people or a belief we don't. So that things like this, the constriction of the piece, the tying of the piece, that's an element that shows an outside hand in these forms. I think that's the best way I can say it right now.
It's something affecting it beyond the norm.
Yeah, and to give a visual of an outside hand in these. You know, again, in certain cases, they could look like they were falling this way, but largely I want to show that these pieces were there was an outside force that exerted them, that performed, you know.
We had Chad's piece by the front door during this show, and we had to put a camera next to it because everybody kept reaching and touching and grabbing at the birds because they were so unbelievably realistic, and people didn't realize, you know, that they were actual artwork, despite the fact they were walking into a gallery. It was quite amazing. We haven't had experience like that, people walking and touching art pieces ever again.
Yeah,
and it just goes to show how we can relate to this form in our natural lives,
Yeah.
those who are involved in art and those who are just coming in to see something shiny. So it was definitely an eye-opening experience, and it just goes to show how important this work is, because it really grabs the hold of the viewer, and you can't not look away. You can't look away. You have to look and experience it, come to your own conclusions before you move on to the next thing, but you're not missing it. There's no way you're not going to be drawn to this work and decide in your head or give an opinion or discuss it with the person next to you. And that's what really was the effect that Chad's work since then and before and after has never left my head. I've always been drawn to it, and the fact that it is creating this artwork in a way that it really pushes the way people perceive. It's not super pretty, but super realistic and tells a story with one piece or more. So thank you, Chad, for joining us today. I really appreciate you being here and explaining and giving people a glimpse into your world and work. And I think it was an important thing to have, and I'm honored to have you in this exhibition.
Well, thank you so much. I talked to you the other day, and you said this from other artists, but man, this was a great thing to have during COVID to focus on, and it's always tough to talk about yourself or to hone in your idea, especially after working on it for years. And there were some growing pains during this, but I got to thank you, Aaron, for this, because I'm at a better place. I have a clearer idea, and probably for the first time in a while, that's going to kick me a little bit out of cruise control, and new ideas are coming. And
Great.
So
great to hear. Will you hold up one of the birds behind you so we get an idea of what it looks like in person? There you go. In scale. It's beautiful. Absolutely incredible, my friend.
And then that's that cleat on the back there.
Ah, very, very nice. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Chad, for honoring us with your talk today, and everybody for being here. And I hope to see you again next week. I wish you a happy weekend in the warm weather, and I hope to see you all again real soon.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Aaron.
Take care.
Bye, Tim.
Bye.
All right,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Bye,
See you
Steve.
later.
All right.